between North Korea and Russia. Drama on the international stage has seriously intensified over the past few days. On Friday, the North fired off its 18th missile test of the year, which turned out to be its second successful intercontinental ballistic missile. And this one, some experts say, is capable of reaching Chicago and possibly even New York or Boston. Asked about the situation today, President Donald Trump had this to say.
We'll handle North Korea. We're going to be able to handle them. It will be handled. We handle everything. Thank you very much.
Trump has also taken to Twitter to call out China's role, saying, "I am very disappointed in China. They do nothing for us with North Korea, just talk. We will no longer allow this to continue. China could easily solve this problem," a sentiment Vice President Mike Pence echoed to an extent over the weekend.
We believe China has a unique relationship with the regime in North Korea and has a unique ability to influence decisions by that regime.
Not to be forgotten, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced this weekend that he's making the U.S. cut 755 diplomatic staff members in the country in retaliation for expanded sanctions overwhelmingly passed by Congress. Of course, in times like these, you really need a steady leadership team in the White House, which is why the swearing in of new Chief of Staff John Kelly, a Brighton native, by the way, on the same day Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci resigned 10 days into the job, might be a little unsettling for some. Joining me now to talk about all this are Gautam Mukunda, Harvard Business School professor and author of Indispensable: When Leaders Really Matter, and Jim Walsh, a senior research associate at MIT's Security Studies program and one of the few Americans who's actually traveled to North Korea for nuclear discussions. Thank you both for being here.
Good to see you.
I almost don't know where to start, but let's start with North Korea. In early July, they tested a missile which we were told had the ability to hit Alaska, now one that could make it to the eastern seaboard. Is it time to freak out? I don't want to ask an incendiary question, but how worried should Americans be about these developments?
Well, I would say obviously it's a bad development. No one wants their homeland to be within target range. I would say, though, it's not quite what people imagine it to be in the following sense. American troops, we have 30,000 American troops in South Korea. We have tens of thousands more in Japan. They've been under nuclear threat with a regular old plane or a medium-range missile for years, as have our treaty allies Japan and South Korea. So we're coming to this game a little late.
Yeah.
Everyone else in the region has already been threatened, and we've been threatened. Or certainly if there was an attack that killed thousands of U.S. servicemen, we would consider that an attack. But yes, there is something special about a missile being able to reach your home address, even though, again, we've experienced this before, the Soviets, so on down the line.
One thing I think that's disconcerting for a lot of people, I'll speak for myself, is the speed with which this seems to be progressing. I mean, it's not a trend. All journalists know you need 3 to make a trend. But, to go from hitting Alaska a month ago to hitting the eastern seaboard, it suggests an alarming escalation in capability.
So the increase in their technical capabilities is a little surprising, I think. I mean, it's a little faster than I would have given them credit for, and I see Jim nodding
I agree.
with some consensus there. But just to echo that, Joseph Stalin was second to none in his level of malevolence and willingness to kill innocent people, and he was able to threaten us with nuclear weapons. The United States government did just fine. I think the greatest danger with the escalation in North Korean capabilities is not what they might do. They could inflict a humanitarian catastrophe on the world of sort of unimaginable proportions with or without these weapons. It's that it might get the Trump administration to do something unwise, reckless, poorly considered, or otherwise, and trigger a crisis that is not necessarily going to happen.
Such as what?
Well, you could imagine people in the Trump administration and sort of people who are close to them, Matt Kroenig is the guy I'm thinking of, are talking about a preemptive strike on the next North Korean launch. I got to think this would be deeply unwise, but that is the sort of thing that you could imagine the Trump administration, well, not the administration, Jim Mattis, I doubt, would support such a move, but you could imagine Donald Trump ordering it and forcing Mattis to sort of think it through. And that would be really unwise, like scary and stupid and really, really a bad move.
Jim, do you agree?
Well, I agree that the risk of North Korea deliberately provoking a war out of the blue is highly, highly unlikely. I mean, they would be crushed. They would be crushed by South Korea's conventional forces alone, not counting everything else. And if there's one thing the Kim family wants, they want to stay in power. So they're not going to commit suicide by initiating a war. But I think there is a risk of miscalculation, misperception. There's an eroding balance, military balance there that could be unstable. So unfortunately, there are paths in which you get war even if you don't want war. And instability in the White House is probably not a welcome time for that.
Well, we will actually get back to that in earnest in a moment. Let me address it indirectly right now. We heard what President Trump had to say. He basically shamed China on social media. Nikki Haley, our ambassador to the UN, took a bit of a different tack. She said, let me quote, "Done talking about North Korea. China is aware they must act. Japan and South Korea must increase pressure. Not only a U.S. problem, it will require an international solution." So a little different from what we heard from the president. Meanwhile, Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, said this: "As the principal economic enablers of North Korea's nuclear weapons and ballistic missile development program, China and Russia bear unique and special responsibility for this growing threat." So what I hear there is three different perspectives on who's to blame for this escalation and how it should be solved. Is that unusual for a presidential administration to have this sort of multivalence of voices?
It's not unusual to have the different perspectives behind the scenes, but when you're actually presenting the world, you don't want to do this. Up until this point, Nikki Haley was sort of the least harmful member of the Trump administration foreign policy team. So the fact that somebody needs to explain to her that done talking is not part of the job of the United Nations ambassador. That sort of talk is it's just poorly considered, right? I mean, I want to give her a little credit, but at the same time, just sort of put this out, it is true that Russia and China have more influence over North Korea than we do. They could hardly have less. But it is also true that their interests are radically different from ours, and the Trump administration appears to be incapable of understanding that very simple fact. Just jawing at them on Twitter is not going to persuade them that China's interest in North Korean stability, which to them trumps every other interest they have with regards to North Korea, is somehow going to shift where they'll put pressure on a country that they really don't want to collapse anytime soon.
Jim, if the Trump administration came to you, let's say John Kelly comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm familiar with your work, love your insights into North Korea, you've spent time there. I need your consultation on how best to address this moving forward." What would you recommend?
Well, I would say right now you're facing a big policy disconnect. The North Koreans can build missiles and better missiles faster than you can impose sanctions that would matter at some point. You are losing that race. So you've got to do something different. And so do something that you've already been successful with. You had backdoor diplomacy that got the college student Otto Warmbier out of North Korea. Tragic tale. But it was diplomacy that worked and achieved that. If you want to freeze North Korea's missile program so it doesn't get any better, the only way you get a freeze is if people sit around the table like this and begin to talk about what might be done for that. I think they have to do more in negotiation. I think they will. I think things are happening behind the scenes. And whether you get an agreement or not, which would be great to freeze it, at least you have opened a channel of communication that reduces that risk of mistake and accidental war that I discussed before. So I think that's one of the big options that really needs more attention, more focus.
Okay. Let's turn to Russia briefly. There is a bill awaiting President Trump's signature that would impose sanctions on North Korea or deploy sanctions on Chinese companies that deal with North Korea, also Iran, also Russia. The premise, of course, is that Russia meddled in the 2016 election and that this is a way to pay them back. It's a premise that President Trump, despite things his spokespeople have said, seems to continue to reject. Is he actually going to sign this when push comes to shove?
The only two people on earth who don't believe that Russia meddled in the American elections are Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. That's what he would tell us. And it's particularly striking that the Russians just expelled 755. They cut our staff of diplomatic embassies.
Some of whom we should mention are locals.
Yeah. In fact, that's probably who most of the jobs will hurt. But I mean, Donald Trump reacts unbelievably over the top, violently to the smallest slight on any subject imaginable. On this subject, he hasn't said a word.
I am glad you said that. I didn't think he'd said anything, but I wasn't 100% sure.
There have been indications given by staff that he will sign the bill, and he's up against it. He's an awkward situation politically. Bill passed, it would be
by overwhelming majorities in both the House and Senate.
Should
a real rare example
should raise a flag for people. Why is it that no one can agree on this and everyone agrees on that? Sometimes that's a healthy thing. In this case, I don't think so. I think we have a sanctions-happy Congress, that the one answer that they can all agree to, no matter what the foreign policy problem, and no matter the likelihood of it being effective or working, is sanctions.
Well, I was going to ask if this would bring us to sort of an equilibrium point in U.S.-Russia relations after this bizarre stretch that we've been through. It sounds like you don't think so. What do you think?
So I agree with Jim that we in general have a sanctions-happy Congress. There's no doubt about that. In the particular case of Russia crossing what has historically been an enormously bright red line, you do not play games with American elections. I suspect this is rather the opposite. This is going to be the first step in a continued pressure. Just play the tape forward a little bit, something Putin strikingly failed to do when he made these moves, right? The Democratic Party is traditionally more dovish towards Russia than the Republicans are. There will be, at some point, a future Democratic administration with Trump keeps the polling numbers he has now, not too long from now. And the Democratic Party is going to be psychotically angry at Russia. And it's hard to imagine the Republican Party flipping sides and being the dovish party there. I would expect that this is not the first, but not the last, but the first move in ramping up American attacks on the Russian
Well, I'd
economy.
say most of this will happen if it happens, though, most of it happens in the executive branch. Yeah. You know, in the cyber domain or in other domains that we're not going to hear about. It's just that we have obviously the executive in this case has a different point of view. But mostly, like, the real response to this happened under Obama and happened probably at the end of 2016. Congress really isn't the player here, the driving actor in foreign policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Closing question for you very quickly.
Yes.
Anthony Scaramucci is out, I think, 15 days before he officially started as White House Communications Director, apparently out at the request of John Kelly, the President's new Chief of Staff. We are hearing that apparently everyone's going to report to John Kelly, Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, Kellyanne Conway. Is this a sign of continued disarray in the White House, or is it perhaps a sign that finally some sort of control is being exerted?
I think it's the latter. I think, you need to have discipline in a White House, and this is apparently what he will attempt to create. The question is how long it will last, and that will depend on the chief in charge. If it will last only as long as he allows it to last.
I think this is a temporary imposition of discipline, but Donald Trump is congenitally undisciplined. In the White House's sort of Game of Thrones for morons, they're going through the cast of characters even faster than the real show. That might make for good TV, but it doesn't make for good government. I think John Kelly is going to discover that the one thing that no one has ever been able to do is get Donald Trump to focus for a very long period of time.
All right. Gautam, Mukunda, Jim Walsh, thank you both.
Thank you.